A very good morning, boys and girls, and welcome to our school assembly this morning, which is on the Last Supper. Now, I'll talk to you about that in just a few moments' time. We'll also read about the Last Supper from the Bible, from the Gospel of St. Luke. But first of all, I just want to talk to you about why Jesus and his friends had a last meal together, or why they were gathered together in Jerusalem to celebrate a special meal. Now, does anyone know the name of the meal that Jesus and the disciples were celebrating? Have you heard of Passover? The Passover meal? If any of you said that, well done. Congratulations, that's exactly it. Jesus and his 12 disciples, his 12 friends, were gathered together in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover meal. Now, the Passover is still today a very, very special and important time of the year for Jewish people. And Jewish people all over the world still today will gather with their family and friends to share the Passover meal. And in fact, it's a bit like Christians want to come together on Christmas Day to share dinner together with family and friends. I'm sure you've all had the experience of maybe a family member being absent at Christmas, and it can be a very upsetting time if someone has to work on Christmas Day, or someone who is away for Christmas and can't be with us for Christmas dinner. It can be a very, very sad time for our parents and our families. So that's how Jewish people feel about their Passover. They want to be together with their family and friends at Passover time, just like we like to be together at Christmas time. And so that's why Jesus wanted to be in Jerusalem with his 12 disciples. So there's the 13 of them gathered together around the table in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover meal. So I'll just talk to you a bit about the Passover. But first of all, just to say to you, boys and girls, that the table in this picture is kind of wrong, because tables at the time of Jesus were actually much lower. They were much closer to the ground. People didn't sit around tables like we see pictured here, or we do today. People in fact kind of lay on the ground. You were very close to the floor actually in ancient times, so the picture isn't accurate in that sense. But however, we won't worry about that. I'll just move the camera now. There's our map underneath. There's the land of Israel, the Holy Land. I'll just move the camera. Oh, there's Cyprus out into the Mediterranean Sea, and there's a big whale, the big fish, and Jonah. Yes, Jonah just about to be swallowed up by the whale there. We talked about Jonah recently at one of our assemblies. Now I'll just move the camera down here into Egypt. There's Egypt, and right beside the name Egypt is this little fella here. Do you know what that is? That's a camel. I don't know if that's a dromedary camel. There's a special name for, I think it's Bacteri and dromedary camels with either one hump or two humps. And this camel, as we see, has only one hump. I think that's a dromedary camel. I'll let you look that up yourself, boys and girls. But anyway, now I just want to come over and talk again about this man here. I'm sure you all remember who this is. Moses. Yes, well done if you guessed. That's Moses. And this man here, seated on the throne, is the Pharaoh. Yes, well done if you guessed that. That's the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Now Moses went to see Pharaoh to ask him to set his people free. See there, he's saying to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." So Moses asked Pharaoh to set the Jewish people free. They were being held captive against their will in Egypt, and he wanted them set free. But Pharaoh said no. So Moses said and warned Pharaoh that unless he set the Jewish people free, that 10 plagues would visit Egypt. That would be 10 awful plagues would come to Egypt. And the final plague was a particularly devastating one, and that was the firstborn in every household died. So that was quite traumatic for the people. But Pharaoh knew what was coming, but he still wouldn't set the people free. So what happened was, on the night of the Passover, this was the last night Jewish people would spend in captivity in Egypt. They knew that a spirit was coming, and that would kill the firstborn in every household. So what they did was they ate a lamb, but the blood of the lamb they put above their doors to show the Lord that the Spirit was to pass them by, to pass over their houses. So the houses that didn't have any lamb's blood on them, in those households all across Egypt, the firstborn died. So it was really quite traumatic for the people of Egypt. So it was because of Pharaoh's intransigence, that is, he was very, very stubborn and he wouldn't set the Jewish people free. So this was the 10th plague. So there were 10 plagues that afflicted Egypt, and Pharaoh had been warned by Moses all about them, but he refused to listen, and so he brought this terrible devastation down on his own people. But the Jewish people celebrated a Passover meal together, and that was so that the Spirit would pass over their houses and that they would be safe on this, their last night in Egypt, and then they would be able to escape to safety. And they fled Egypt very, very quickly. As soon as they had eaten their meals, they left Egypt, and there we see the path that they took. That's where Moses parted the Red Sea, so the Jewish people were able to cross over the sea. Now, their bread didn't have time to rise. I don't know if any of you, if your mums or dads bake at home, or maybe you bake yourself, but you'll know that you have to put yeast in bread in order to get it to rise. That is so that the bread becomes much thicker and better to eat. But the Jewish people didn't have time to let their bread rise. So very often Passover is also called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And unleavened bread is bread without yeast that's very, very flat indeed. So this is the route that Moses and the Jewish people took all the way back to the Holy Land, to Israel. You see there they went on quite a bit of a circuitous route. 40 years they spent wandering in the deserts after they left Egypt. But as I say, Passover is also called the Feast of Unleavened Bread because there we see on the table there some bread as well. See there, the flat bread that the disciples are eating. So because the bread didn't have time to rise, it was completely flat. It didn't have time to rise up. So that's why Passover is often called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And we'll see that in our Gospel story, which I'll read to you in just a few moments. But just a reminder, that's why Jesus and his 12 disciples were gathered together at the Last Supper, was because they were celebrating Passover and remembering the night that the Jewish people spent their last night of captivity in Egypt and escaped safely and well to freedom. Welcome, boys and girls, to St. Peter's Church here in Mountrath. I'm here in the side chapel, and I'll explain what that is to you in just a few moments. But first of all, I'm going to read to you from the Bible, and it's the story of the Last Supper, which Jesus celebrated with his disciples, and it comes from the Gospel. That means good news, according to St. Luke, one of the disciples who wrote the Gospel. The day of unleavened bread came. This was the day the Passover lambs had to be sacrificed. Jesus said to Peter and John, "Go and prepare the Passover meal for us to eat." They asked, "Where do you want us to prepare it?" Jesus said to them, "Listen, after you go into the city, you will see a man carrying a jar of water. Follow him into the house that he enters. Tell the person who owns that house, 'The teacher asks that you please show us the room where he and his followers may eat the Passover meal.' Then he will show you a large room upstairs. This room is ready for you. Prepare the Passover meal there." So Peter and John left. Everything happened exactly as Jesus had said, so they prepared the Passover meal. When the time came, Jesus and the apostles were sitting at the table. He said to them, "I wanted very much to eat this Passover meal with you before I die. I will never eat another Passover meal again until it has given its true meaning in the kingdom of God." Then Jesus took a cup. He gave thanks to God for it and said, "Take this cup and give it to everyone here. I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until God's kingdom comes." Then Jesus took some bread. He thanked God for it, broke it, and gave it to the apostles. Then Jesus said, "This bread is my body that I am giving up for you. Do this and remember me." In the same way, after supper, Jesus took the cup and said, "This cup shows the new agreement that God makes with his people. This new agreement begins with my blood, which is poured out for you. Amen." Okay, boys and girls, I'll explain that to you. I'll just grab the camera first and I'll talk from behind the camera for you. First of all, just to say about a side chapel, you might remember from our tour of St. Peter's Church. There's the holy table in the sanctuary, and the lovely cross at the back of the church there. There's the main body of the church. I'm here in the side chapel. A side chapel is a part of a church that is set aside, that has another holy table in it. And the reason for that is that this is where smaller groups can meet and can have services in church. And the reason I'm here is because of the coronavirus. So as I'm not in the main body of the church, just so we're keeping it closed as a precaution. Now, boys and girls, this is the holy table in the side chapel here in St. Peter's Church. And there's something written on the front of the holy table. Now, let me see. Do this in remembrance of me. Okay? Do this in remembrance of me. Who do you think me is? Okay, did you say Jesus? Very well done if you did, because you might remember in the story of the Last Supper there, which St. Luke wrote for us, he said that Jesus said to do this and remember him. So we're remembering Jesus when we do something special here at the holy table. So like Jesus and his friends sat at a table and celebrated the Passover meal, we as Christians gather around this holy table on a Sunday and we remember something that Jesus did that night at the Last Supper. And what did he do, boys and girls? He blessed some bread and he blessed the fruit of the vine. Okay, and the fruit of the vine is wine. Wine is made from grapes which grow on vines. So when Jesus said the fruit of the vine, he meant wine, bread and wine. This is a special cup, boys and girls. We call it a chalice. It's shaped exactly like a cup would have been at the time of Jesus. So basically it's just a cup, but we call it a chalice. And this flat plate, which we put the bread on, is called a paten. So we have a paten and a chalice. Now, when Jesus was in Jerusalem that night with his friends, he didn't have a chalice and a paten. He had a plate and a cup. And as we saw in the gospel story there, Jesus passed the cup around to his friends, passed the bread to his friends, and he blessed the bread, he blessed the wine. And this is what Jesus is asking us to do when we remember him. So he's asking us to remember the night, the last night that he was with his friends when they celebrated the Passover meal. And they celebrated that wonderful Jewish festival, the Passover. And they remembered Moses leading the Jewish people out of slavery in Egypt. But Jesus did something different at the end of the meal. He blessed bread, he blessed wine, and he passed it around to his friends, and he asked them to do this in remembrance of me, to do it, and to think of Jesus when we do it. So when Christians gather in church on Sunday, this is what we do. When we celebrate Holy Communion, or Eucharist, or the Lord's Supper, or some Christians call it Mass, or Divine Liturgy, when we gather to do this in church, we're remembering what Jesus did, and what Jesus did was to give his life for us, because that night he was arrested and taken into custody for a crime he didn't commit. He did no wrong, but the Roman army put him on trial and executed him there in Jerusalem, and he was prepared to give his life because he loved us so much that ultimately when he came to earth he was prepared to give his life for us. That's how much he loved us, and that's what Jesus wants us to remember every time we take in our hands the bread or the chalice with the wine. Well, now I've changed. I'm wearing what's called a cassock. Have you heard of a cassock before? Sometimes it's called a soutane, cassock, soutane. It's just a special garment that members of the clergy wear. It's all in black. which black is a solemn colour. Again, it's just about being quiet and respectful and calm. It's the same with judges. If you're ever in a court, if you find yourself in front of the judge, you'll see that he or she is dressed in black. And the barristers, they're the special solicitors or lawyers who work in a court. The barristers also wear black as well. So it's what we call a solemn, just a special colour for calmness and for respect and so on. That's why it's that. Now I'll just pop on this white garment here. Now, this is another special garment. This is not an alb. This is called a surplice, and it goes over the cassock. So I'll just pop that over my head, guys. Now, so that goes on. There we go. Now, so the surplice is a special. Again, you see the white colour, and again that reminds us of the presence of Christ, because again, white is really, really shiny in the light. It's a special colour. So a lot of church garments or vestments are white in colour. Again, just reminding us of the light of Christ. Although the light of the candle is actually yellow, but this bright colour represents the presence of Christ. Now, sometimes we'll wear the stole over the surplice and the cassock. Okay, now, but also we have these here also coloured black. And this time the reason these are coloured black, this guys is called an academic hood, and this represents a degree that's what you earn in university, and I'm sure many of you will be going on to university and will earn degrees. And this special academic hood, black, and with the, it's probably hard for you to make out there on the camera, but the black as well. This represents a Bachelor of Divinity. Now, this is actually from Trinity College in Dublin, where I didn't study. I studied my Bachelor of Divinity in Maynooth, but at the time when I was getting an academic hood, they misunderstood, and so I got Bachelor of Divinity for Trinity College rather than my own University of Maynooth. But however, it doesn't matter, it's the same. It's much the same thing. I'll just pop this on and I'll show you how it goes on. Now, there we go. So this is how you put on an academic hood. I just have to duck my head down now, and there we go. You throw it over your head like that, and there's a little button here on the cassock that the academic hood clips onto. Now, there we go. Okay, can you see that? And then over the academic hood, we place this special piece of cloth. Now again, this is not a stole, okay? This is just called a scarf, or a teaching scarf. Teaching scarf or preaching scarf. Now, have you ever seen me dressed like this before? I'm sure you have. This is when a member of the clergy now would dress like this when not celebrating Holy Communion, when just leading a service maybe of evening prayer or morning prayer in church. So that's when we just wear the solemn robes to let people know that we're celebrating something solemn, that we're coming together to worship the Lord, but not for Holy Communion. So I wouldn't dress like this for Holy Communion. We wear the stole, the coloured stole, when celebrating Holy Communion. Okay, boys and girls, it's time to finish up. We'll finish with the Lord's Prayer and the school prayer. I want to show you some of the special clothes that I wear in church, or the members of the clergy in other churches wear when celebrating Holy Communion or when performing a special function in the church. I'm wearing this white garment here. Can anyone guess what that's called? It's called an alb. Did any of you guess that? If you did, well done, very good. A-L-B, alb, and it comes to us from the Latin word for white. And the reason for that is that albs are always coloured white. And the reason for that is that at the time of Jesus, white was a very, very special colour, because white cloth was very, very expensive, and it was also very, very difficult to keep clean. So people wore white only on very, very special occasions, and only people who could afford special white garments would buy white, like I'm wearing now. And if you can imagine in the Middle East, with the sun beating down overhead, anything coloured white really, really shines. It soaks up the sun, and you really, really stand out in white on a hot summer's day. And so for those many, many reasons, white was considered a very, very special colour. So when people wanted to become Christians and were baptised, they would wear white garments, and they'd save up all the money that they had to get very, very special white garments, and they'd go to church and they'd be baptized in their white albs, and they'd come out into the outside, into the sun, and they would really, really shine like the light of Christ. So that's why to this day the alb is always coloured white. And an alb is a special garment that just covers your ordinary clothes right down from your neck to your feet. Now this piece of cloth here as well, this is called a stole. Did any of you get that? S-T-O-L-E. Don't worry, it's nothing got to do with theft. It's simply a word for a long piece of cloth that stretches down. So this is a very long piece of cloth. Indeed, it's all the ones that stretches right from there, right around, and both sides come down below my knees. So that's the stole. Now this stole is coloured green because for most of the year in church things are decorated in green, the colour of life. But at special parts of the church's year, we use different colours. Can you guess some of the colours that we use? Well, there is red, there's purple, and there's white. Okay, did you guess that? Purple is worn at Advent and Lent, because purple is a special colour associated with mourning, people who are sad after death. So at those times of the church's year when we're trying to be, well, not sad, but solemn. Have you heard that word before? Solemn. It's when we're being respectful and calm and quiet, or just preparing for something else. So that's why purple is worn during Advent, when we prepare for the coming of Christ at Christmas. And during Lent we wear purple as well, again reminding us, because eventually Jesus is going to die for us at Christmas, like we were talking about the Last Supper. White is worn on very, very special occasions, like the white alb. White is worn at Christmas, for example. So Christmas and Easter, when we're full of joy and we're celebrating the presence of Christ, we wear white. So this would be coloured white. And red is the colour of blood, and we wear red on particular days associated with certain saints or martyrs. A martyr is a person who gives their life for their faith. And so there are many times throughout the church's year when we remember the saints and the martyrs. So I'm going to switch into another garment now.